Hello everyone, welcome to Diplomatic Briefing. After the China-US high-level officials signed the Geneva Agreement in Switzerland on May 12, the first meeting of the China-US Economic and Trade Consultation Mechanism was held in London, UK, from the 9th to the 10th local time. According to CCTV quoting the Chinese Chief Representative, Vice Premier He Lifeng, both sides had in-depth exchanges on economic and trade issues of mutual concern and pointed out that the essence of China-US economic and trade relations is mutual benefit and win-win cooperation. There are no winners in a trade war. China does not want to fight, but is also not afraid to fight. It was further emphasized that China approaches the economic and trade consultations with sincerity, but also with principles. The next step is to make good use of the consultation mechanism to continuously build consensus and reduce misunderstandings. This time, the first meeting of the China-US Economic and Trade Consultation Mechanism was held in London, led by China's Chief Representative He Lifeng and the U.S. side's chief representatives, Treasury Secretary Bessent, Commerce Secretary Roderick, and Trade Representative Greer. According to reports from the Chinese side, both parties engaged in frank and in-depth dialogue, thoroughly exchanging views on economic and trade issues of mutual concern. They reached a principled agreement on a framework of measures to implement the important consensus from the phone call between the two heads of state on May 6 and to consolidate the outcomes of the Geneva economic and trade talks, making new progress in addressing each other's economic and trade concerns. He Lifeng said this meeting was an important consultation under the strategic consensus reached by the two heads of state on June 5 this year. He pointed out that China's attitude and position on Sino-US economic and trade issues are clear and consistent. The essence of Sino-US economic and trade relations is mutual benefit and win-win results. In the economic and trade field, cooperation between China and the US benefits both sides, while confrontation hurts both. There are no winners in a trade war. China does not want to fight, but is not afraid to fight either. I said that both sides should resolve economic and trade differences through equal dialogue and mutually beneficial cooperation. China approaches economic and trade consultations with sincerity, but also with principles. He Lifeng stated that, moving forward, both sides should follow the important consensus and requirements reached during the phone call between the two heads of state, further make good use of the China-US Economic and Trade Consultation Mechanism, continuously enhance consensus, reduce misunderstandings, and strengthen cooperation. China reiterated that both sides should move towards each other, keep their word, follow through on their actions, demonstrate a spirit of integrity in honoring commitments, and take concrete steps to implement the consensus reached. Together, they should safeguard the hard-won results of dialogue, continue to maintain communication and dialogue, promote the steady and long-term development of China-US economic and trade relations, and inject more certainty and stability into the world economy. The Chinese side quoted U.S. representatives as saying this meeting achieved positive results and further stabilized bilateral economic and trade relations. They stated that, in line with the requirements set by the two heads of state during their phone call, they will work with the Chinese side to implement the consensus reached at this meeting. U.S. Secretary of Commerce Wilbur Ross told the media that he and U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer would return to Washington, D.C. to ensure that President Trump approves the framework of this agreement. He said that if Chinese President Xi Jinping also agrees, they will implement this framework. Su Jianwei, senior economist at Natixis, analyzed that both sides will now report the situation to their leaders, clearly indicating that some differences or unresolved details still require internal discussion. He believes that this framework agreement shows both sides are committed to easing tensions and continuing the dialogue process. But whether a concrete agreement or any substantial breakthrough can be reached is still uncertain. Meanwhile, Scott Kennedy, senior advisor and chair of Chinese business and economics at the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington, said that this agreement is maintained by the mutual influence of both sides, rather than by shared principles or common interests, so there is a high possibility of stops and starts in the future. After the first day of negotiations, U.S. President Trump told the media at the White House that all the news he received was good. But China is not easy to deal with. According to Singapore's Lian Hazaobao, scholars believe that China is taking a tough stance because it holds the rare earth card, making it very difficult for the U.S. to handle. Song Wendy, a researcher at the U.S. think tank Atlantic Council, believes that China is using a tactic of kicking the ball down the road. That is, instead of agreeing to relax export controls on rare earths all at once, China will select a few out of the 17 types of rare earths to either lift or ease restrictions in exchange for U.S. concessions in areas like tariffs and technology. Afterwards, China will reassess how to adjust its approach to maximize its own interests. He described it as, "You can't give out all the prizes at once, otherwise, others won't have much reason to treat you nicely anymore." He also assessed that there is hope for a slight adjustment in the tariffs that China and the U.S. have imposed on each other. Xu Feng, dean of the School of International Studies at Nanjing University, analyzed that both China and the U.S. are facing economic pressure. It's impossible to air out all the issues in a single negotiation, but he believes positive progress can be made. He also thinks the two countries will find a balance on export controls to minimize the damage. More importantly, the high tariffs that both countries have imposed on each other must be reduced. China will not accept discriminatory suppression from the U.S., meaning that the additional tariffs imposed should not exceed 10%. This is the rate that the U.S. applies to most of its partners. Li Mingjiang, associate professor at the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies, Nanyang Technological University, Singapore, says the gap between China and the U.S. in positions and demands is large. If an agreement is reached, both sides will have made significant compromises. Washington would need to make bigger concessions than Beijing, as the U.S. policy of strategic technological suppression against China is established. If they scale it back, they will face pushback from the national security team. Both China and the U.S. have given relatively positive assessments of this round of talks, but the long-term competition between the two countries is unlikely to change. While the China-US talks were taking place, China's diplomatic team was also busy, continuing to deepen cooperation with countries in the global south and working together to build a broader market space. The coordinators' meeting of the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation at the ministerial level was held in Changsha, Hunan, on June 11th. The meeting issued the Changsha Declaration on China-Africa Solidarity and Cooperation for the Global South. The declaration bluntly stated that certain countries are attempting to use tariffs as a tool to disrupt the existing international economic and trade order, which undermines the principles of justice in the international community. It specifically called on the United States and other countries to return to the right track of resolving trade disputes through consultations based on equality, respect, and mutual benefit. According to the declaration released by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, China and Africa both agree that the current rise of unilateralism, protectionism, and economic bullying has created serious difficulties for the economic and social development and improvement of people's livelihoods in developing countries, including those in Africa. This has become an urgent challenge that must be addressed by global South countries, including China and Africa. The declaration stressed that, as some countries use tariffs to disrupt the international economic and trade order and undermine justice, China and Africa urge all countries, especially the United States, to resolve trade disputes through equal, respectful, and reciprocal consultations. Africa also expressed appreciation for China's determination in upholding fairness, justice, and the international economic and trade order. China also highly appreciates African countries for upholding fundamental principles, sovereignty, fairness, justice. In the face of external pressure, they have maintained the united stance, refused unilateral compromises, stood by each other, shown mutual respect, firmly opposed any party reaching compromises or deals at the expense of other countries' interests. The declaration calls on the international community to uphold the principles of joint consultation, joint contribution, and shared benefits, adhere to genuine multilateralism, jointly oppose unilateralism and protectionism, safeguard the international system with the United Nations at its core, and protect the multilateral trading system with the World Trade Organization at its center. In addition, China and Africa will stand united to strengthen the foundation of sovereign equality, upholding that all countries, regardless of size, strength, or weakness, are equal members of the international community. They will resolutely safeguard international fairness and order, continue to firmly defend each other's legitimate rights and interests, and work hand in hand amid turmoil and change, supporting and understanding each other. By relying on the stability of China-Africa relations, they aim to bring stability to an uncertain world and promote a multipolar world that is equal and orderly. On June 11th, President Xi Jinping sent a congratulatory letter to the coordinators meeting on the implementation of the outcomes of the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation, warmly congratulating the convening of the meeting. President Xi said that in the past 25 years, the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation has strongly driven China-Africa cooperation development, becoming a model of unity and cooperation among the Global South. President Xi also said that at a time when the international situation is undergoing complex changes, China remains committed to using the new achievements of Chinese-style modernization to provide new opportunities for the world, and to using China's vast market to offer new momentum to Africa and other partners in the global south. China is willing to promote the signing of agreements on jointly developing economic and trade partnerships, implement a zero-tariff policy on 100% of taxable products from the 53 African countries that have diplomatic relations with China, and at the same time provide more convenience for exports from Africa's least developed countries to China. President Xi said that China is willing to work with Africa to implement the 10 cooperation plans, strengthen cooperation in key areas such as green industries, e-commerce and payment technology, and artificial intelligence, deepen cooperation in security, finance, and the rule of law, and promote high-quality development of China-Africa cooperation. To put it simply, first, this round of China-US negotiations has reached a certain consensus and produced a framework, but both delegations need final approval from their top leaders, which shows that both sides have made compromises. China has already made it clear that it will not sacrifice its fundamental interests. The U.S. team has stated that they need to wait for Trump's decision. It is believed that the U.S. side may have made bigger concessions. Second, China joining forces with Africa to openly criticize the U.S. is a diplomatic victory. Don't underestimate the international influence of African countries just because they are less developed. Back in the day, China also relied on Africa's support to regain its seat in the United Nations. After Trump launched a global tariff war, China became the only country to respond with equal countermeasures, and even managed to force the U.S. to seek compromise. This has further boosted China's international image, making it a role model for global South countries that dare to say no to the U.S.